Okay, energy up. Woo! Hi, welcome to AI After Hours. I'm Polly Allen, and this is Yuying Chen Nguyen. We're two product executives with deep experience in building and productionizing AI systems, and we started this YouTube podcast to shed some light on the hype and misinformation in the AI headlines, and have some fun along the way.
I think the note we should add here is we had to build AI systems before it was easy. So it's really painful what we went through. And it's annoying as heck watching the new people who are like, let's just call an API. Here's some. I'm like, you have it so easy. Back when I was your age, I had to walk uphill both ways on one foot, barefoot. Anyway, that's our point of view right here.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting right now that for years we've talked about how hard it is to get AI systems to production, and we've had these stats of 85% of AI projects fail. There are some things that large language models do make easier, but I think people are still underestimating how hard. There's something about the current environment where people think, wow, they're magical and they'll just be really easy and do everything.
Can you launch next week?
Right.
But still, I'm annoyed at how easy it is that they don't have to go through the pain I did of like waiting for my data, cleaning my data until it's big enough, and then running it, be like, no, that was not the right data. We got to collect some new ones. Wait another 6 months.
There's so many little details that now we can kind of skip over because tools have gotten so much better. I totally agree. It's way more fun now. So that's the cool part. And way more people can participate in it, which is even better.
Yeah. And most people are like, ooh, you're working in that space. Cool. Before it was like, what?
Yeah. I was like, you don't know how many things I had to go through removing semicolons from a column or something.
Oh, giving me flashbacks.
So we wanted to do some deep dives per vertical on what's happening in AI these days. And the first theme we picked was finance.
Because money makes the world go round.
It's true. It's true. We are product managers. Our first consideration is business. So let's start with show me the money, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Start us off, Polly.
I wanted to start off talking about how, in thinking about this episode ahead of time, we were looking into what are the latest headlines, what are the latest tools in finance that we could demo, and we kept coming up kind of blank, right, Yuying? I was pretty surprised.
There was not a lot, and even one of the major headlines I was chasing down, as I chased it down, I'm like, oh, they misunderstood a tweet. This is not really a custom LLM, but the CEO of Stripe said something about an internal LLM, and everybody, and I've heard it on other podcasts, who are like, oh my God, look, Stripe just built their own LLM. They're like, forget the big ones. We don't need someone else. We can build our own. I'm like, hey, cool. Let me check out why. As I tracked it down, not at all the case. He was talking about an internal implementation of an existing LLM for the use of their employees, not creating one from scratch. So there is not a payments specific LLM coming out of Stripe that was misunderstood. So the thing that has come out of Stripe, they do use LLMs quite a bit internally for their own employee efficiencies, but they have announced natural language-based fraud rule creation. So if you get a lot of random charges from an interesting domain name that's misspelled, you can just highlight it and tell it to create a fraud rule to essentially block the charges from those things, which I was like, okay, I can see how that's easier, but who really needs that? How widely spread is this that someone who doesn't understand code need to create fraud rules on the fly using natural language? But it's cool to demo. So that's what I found on the Stripe site. So not a custom LLM, some cool features, definitely internal use for the company efficiencies. Hopefully you found something that was a little deeper implementation, Polly.
Well, what I'm seeing across the board is a lot of times people are doing things like that, where you're like, creation of fraud rules, isn't that just a classification problem? Weren't we able to do that with, I love this term, vintage AI, not old, boring last
Oh my
year's
God,
AI.
are we vintage? Are we coming back as cool because we're vintage?
Vintage means you get better with age.
Oh, thank you. I'm going for the wine there.
Fine wine. An older vintage is more valuable. Part of the reason is the explainability you need in these systems, right? So if you're going to like accuse a company of fraud and the system is automating that decision for you, you need some explainability. And these LLMs a lot of the time don't have it unless you're using it in a really narrow use case. Like, here's the rule we created. Someone created that rule for us using an LLM, right? So it needs to be accountable to someone or have really clear explainability as to what it's doing. And those are tough things to get out of our current large language models. The go-to example in finance for a couple months now, probably since March, I think that when it came out, is Bloomberg's GPT. So Bloomberg did create their own finance model from scratch. They're one of the biggest financial companies out there. If you're not familiar, Bloomberg terminals sell for thousands of dollars, and traders use them to keep up on the news, to have all their information to actually make their trades. That they can be on top of their particular vertical, right? They're really good at keeping a trader in a particular area super up to date on what's going on and pricing in any new information into their buying and selling decisions. So they have licensed a whole bunch of news from third parties. They do their own coverage too. They have this massive database of news and also analyst reports and things that their own analysts have written over the years. And instead of fine-tuning an existing large language model, which is considerably cheaper, they decided to go straight out and train their own model from scratch for finance purposes. And there was a lot of headlines that came out of it, which I think was kind of the purpose, saying, hey, these are fine-tuned for finance, but it also doesn't sacrifice performance compared to other LLMs on other language NLP tasks. So you can still ask it questions. You could get it to generate code for you. They didn't really test out, will it write me poetry in the style of Hamilton or musicals, etc. I don't know if they fully tested all the use cases I find important, but they definitely provided in their paper some benchmarking against other large language models, saying, look at this, we've made something that's at least as good as ChatGPT. It was 3.5 at the time. They did not compare it to GPT-4 on a range of tasks, and it outperforms those models on finance tasks. What I think is so interesting is the headlines would certainly make you believe, one, the finance tasks are things like picking stocks, doing analysis on portfolios, day trading, and people are going, oh my gosh, computers are taking over and it's going to take over a stockbroker's whole job. And we'll dive into why that is not the case. And then secondarily, some of the headlines were really touting they've built the best model for all of these tasks that's out there, simply because in the paper, they compare it to a bunch of other LLMs for tasks like classifying news, whether it's sports or politics, for example, or things like natural entity recognition. So if you are trying to recognize whether this word dominoes is the company Dominoes or the game Dominoes with the little tiles,
right?
A financially tuned model is more likely to recognize it as the company right away. So that advantage of being fine-tuned is great. It doesn't make it better than the best of class algorithms and classification, which are actually those old vintage models, really. So best in class classification models can get up to 90% accuracy, and none of these models, including BloombergGPT, were getting even close. So yeah. It was overhyped, I think, in terms of touted as the best new large language model out there that happens to be good at financial tasks, when really, if they wanted something good at financial tasks, they could have just fine-tuned an open source model and probably got similar results and paid a lot less for it.
Yeah, so the question that came to me, because I listened to a podcast where the guy that led the ML team at Bloomberg GPT had an in-depth dive about also the paper that they published of the decision between kind of training the model from scratch versus fine tuning. I think at the time, their decision point centered around how much financial specific data they had access to, which is fairly sizable.
Right.
And for the amount of data that they were training the model on, it was essentially like a 50%. So that's how much data they do own. So Bloomberg definitely has a big advantage in the data asset content place. He's like, well, when it's 50%, shouldn't you just train from scratch versus fine tuning?
Yeah.
How do you think about should someone fine tune versus train from scratch? Is it really the kind of the data set that determines that?
Yeah, there's two pieces. One, so having Bloomberg's size of corpus in the domain for which you're trying to solve problems is like pretty rare, right? So there are not that many companies on earth right now that should really be looking at creating their own LLM unless they really believe they're going to go up against OpenAI and Anthropic. And unless they're like willing to go out and get the kind of investment they need to continue to go up against them and support what third-party LLMs are going to be able to do, right? You were just mentioning the crazy investment in Anthropic this week. How much was it?
That was an additional 100 million. They already had a couple of 100 million in, and they're projecting something like 5 billion over the next couple of years to really get to what their model is aiming for. So it is capital intensive.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's my other thing here is what would be the cost difference? Do you have an idea?
I do know training your own is in the hundreds of thousands to millions, depending on how complicated your task is. And it's also that underlying corpus of understanding how English works, right? What are the rules of English and getting to natural language embeddings that create a system where you have fluent English coming out the other side consistently. That is a lot of work to go and assemble and clean. They've definitely shown you don't maybe need as much as you have in models like ChatGPT because there's a lot of repetition, but that you do need it to be high quality. So you either invest in gathering a whole bunch or you invest in curating it or both. All of that makes me really question the value, if especially like right now we have Llama 2 as an open source model that's been released that was built on more high quality data. That didn't exist when Bloomberg.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. Do you think they would have made a different call
potentially
had Llama 2 been out?
Right. I'm sure they want to use something internally. They want people using their Bloomberg terminal to be able to ask questions, basically do everything you can do with ChatGPT without compromising their data by sharing it with a third-party service. So definitely third-party service was out the window for them. It was either open source or build their own from scratch. I think too, with building their own from scratch, they have a lot more visibility and control over exactly what did go into the model. So open source, you can't just say, please ignore this set of the corpus that was used in your training. So you can get an even higher quality set of data if you want. I think the analysis could have come out in the favor of fine-tuning Llama 2, but you'd have to do a deep dive.
I'm wondering if, number one, if the fundamental grammar isn't that different, is there really an advantage to training your own from scratch if you're not in it for the arms race? Like, you know, Google needs to have their own, Microsoft needs to have their own, Apple, if they get into it, probably needs to have their own to have full kind of IP claim and control. But otherwise, you're spending all that cost redoing the grammar understanding of the natural language underneath it. And it did sound like, I can give you the link to the podcast I was listening to, that cost actually is going to limit a lot of things. So there were tasks where they could have kept going and kept tuning and kept running to get better performance. But if they weren't getting better performance within a long time, they were already in the multi-millions, right? They would cut it off. Exactly. And number two, this was a machine learning team of 9 people, right? So if you look at OpenAI, I don't know how many Google has, but OpenAI in general is like 300 some employees. It's capital intensive, it's people intensive if you're really going to work on LLMs as a core competency. You got to be prepared for that. Otherwise, I think it was great to have that attempt to go, okay, how much of a difference does it make? I think from my perspective, this information will be useful as other big verticals look at, do they want to create a custom LLM? The investment in Anthropic by SK, they make mention about a more tuned telecom-based LLM. I'm like, I hope they go through the findings from Bloomberg and go, okay, what really makes a difference? How do we best spend the money to get something that focuses on what's specific in an industry?
I love that take about the arms race, because I think that to me was what Bloomberg was saying, is they're saying we are in the arms race. We think part of that will be a carving up of these large monolithic, one model to serve all purposes. We're going to be the finance model. So if you have finance tasks, you should come to us. we can still be that general purpose model for everything else, but we're specifically good at finance. It will be interesting to see if that does happen, right? Instead of one model for all use cases is what these foundation models are about, or if that foundation model game becomes a little bit fractured by vertical.
I think they can. I think out of all the players out there, I would vote that they can do it, but it feels like they need to understand what they're going to get into and put the money and the people behind it and really focus on the task that's going to make a difference and get them the revenue on the other side of it, right? Because I mean, the entire finance industry consumes all of their content output on the investment side, whether you're amateur or you're in the pro space. They are perfectly situated. So I'm thinking that hopefully there's bigger strategies that will reveal that will actually go after the heart, but you're going to need money and people behind it. And maybe they need an alliance and it's not just them like the SK is doing with 4 other telcos. Maybe.
Yeah, industry-wide initiatives. The piece that I think is interesting is all of the tasks that they approached, none of them were mathematical calculation tasks in their paper, right? It was all still natural language processing tasks of named entity recognition, that dominoes problem of sentiment classification, things like that. It was interesting. Again, headlines kind of made it seem like this was going to take over day trading tomorrow.
So they did do some extra treatment in terms of understanding data and the digits and not mixing them around, because showing up the right number and the right digits in the right sequence, right? It's crucial in finance. You don't just switch your 2s or 3s and add like a 0 at the end because you see a lot of zeros behind the 2, right? It's not a statistical thing. And if you saw that number, that's the number you got to keep. So that particular piece, I'm like, okay, that is what you want in terms of numbers.
I was going to ask if they covered this on your podcast. Did they talk at all about licensing any of the third-party news content? That they did not.
It was still focused for them, Bloomberg internal employee usage. And even then, you had to sign something to get access. It was not open access, and there's still disclaimers about inaccuracies, etc.
They must have made arrangements with their news providers saying, we're not broadly making your news content available. They're probably paying for access to that news content already for their employees. And then the fact that they're summarizing news content and doing that internally is up to them.
That part of it is apparently very complex, even though we think of company earnings and all those as being public information. But the streams of analysis, etc., each one of them has a different license about what you can do with it. There's a fundamental assumption that it's for a human to read and to understand. Some of it are specific enough that it says it's not for machine consumption. Some of it is not. So when I looked into this going, all this information is public, we should be able to create something just as a POC. They were like, actually, you're going to need to go look at the license for every single stream of information that comes in to see what's allowed or not allowed, even though it's all technically public information because it's public company information.
Right.
So
whether you're fine tuning or whether you're building your own model, I think that's a whole side of the costs that people can ignore. They're so focused on the technology costs and the GPUs. There's actually a huge amount of labor that goes into not only finding the data, but do we have the rights to use it? Are we using it in ways we have rights to use?
So the advantage that Bloomberg has, it does have a significant amount of its own content that it produces for licensing it. So they couldn't experiment with that all they want to.
They're pretty well positioned, really, but it's rare. I hear so many other banks coming out saying, should we do this too? And it's like, well, do you have Bloomberg level volumes of information that you own, right? That you can use.
How about the rest of the financial space that kind of gets us into more of the investing space? When you look outside, most of the applications I still see is related to code generation, right? So on the investment side, there's your normal, let me read the information, let me understand it, and then I make a decision. And then there are what's called the quants, right? The guys that understand both enough statistics as well as coding, and they can write algorithms for either pattern identification or alerts or what have you, or even fully automated trading. Really, outside of Bloomberg, the only major use case I'm seeing is using LLMs to do code generation into Python or writing some of these more automated piece of analysis, essentially to democratize algorithmic analysis. And that's it. That's what I'm seeing. What about you?
I think it's similar. I think there's been attempts to do things like loan approvals based on people's characteristics or fraud detection, anomaly detection in patterns in banking. The issue is that any advanced AI systems beyond the most, like just look at a linear chart and look at the pattern of the data, they become less explainable. And then you cannot provide the basis on which you've denied someone a loan or on which you've declared something fraud. And that just won't fly in this industry, right? So not only do you have the considerations about security and privacy of the data, keeping them from really experimenting with third-party services and being limited to either building their own or all the work of fine-tuning an open source LLM internally. But even then, if it won't work for the business because it's not explainable enough, it's keeping a lot of these use cases from being something where LLMs can really be leveraged.
Okay. So vintage AI wins.
Vintage
LLMs
AI
help you generate code, and we have hopes for BloombergGPT, but so far, not mind-blowing yet.
Right, it's early signals that BloombergGPT could definitely have some advantages on those very specific NLP-related finance tasks that they've tuned for. It's early to say whether or not we'll see like fracturing of foundation models into verticals like that. The different people are the bigger players in it. And if someone can take an open source model and fine tune it on very few examples and get very similar results, then it hasn't been a good investment from BloombergGPT's point of view, right? I wanted to dive a little deeper on what you say when you're writing code. It's good to call out what they're writing code for, right? So rather than asking the LLMs to do numerical analysis, they're actually saying, oh, instead of hiring a data science intern to do this for me, I, as a non-coder, will generate the code using some of these plugins for ChatGPT. Right.
So it's usually your traders that are kind of on the edge of quant, right? They understand enough math to want some more complicated answers of historical performance, of patterns that may be of related stock movements, et cetera, where normally they're like, okay, I'm going to go learn Python and hopefully I didn't get it wrong, or I'm going to go write some more SQL or R and kind of get lost along the way because I didn't set up my notebook properly.
Exactly. I'll just get lost learning how to install stupid Python on my notebook just because that.
Right. And usually even in professional firms, you don't have data analysts and scientists supporting every trader.
Right.
Right. So they're like, well, if I have a big enough question, maybe the data team will answer. But if I have too many questions, it'll just be like, okay, just I cannot support you. Someone else is priority. So it expands what kind of more detailed answers from data that they otherwise would be able to get just by reading the news. Be like, I think there's a pattern here.
Right. I'm seeing more and more patterns around automating like a chat interface to talk to structured data. People are saying, I just want like a chat GPT interface to be able to just chat directly with my database, feed it the database structure I have, you write SQL queries and query it for me.
Right.
And the LLM is actually running that code. I don't know if it's reliable enough yet, but I have seen that AWS, for example, is touting those kind of capabilities on Bedrock. So across verticals, it's seeing the most interest across a lot of different industries. And that will be something where if they can just naturally chat with data in whatever format it's already in, without having to write code and extract it and transform it, that'll be another shortening step if that.
And the better use case there right now is still on historical data, where they call either back testing or just looking for patterns in the historical data. In the live real time, if you're just dealing with stock equities, the amount of data that's coming in real time might still be okay to interact against to get you that answer in real time. But when you're getting into financial derivatives, I know this is words I never thought I would say, the options market, futures market, commodities, when they say real-time data, we're talking about updates on the millisecond, like millions of data flowing through. And you're like, great, I love have a natural language interface. Is it actually going to come back? And when it comes back, how
Right.
delayed am I? And if it's wrong. So the historical data piece really gives you a little bit of wiggle room on that time response for the answer. And you can cross-check to verify it. If you're wanting real time and you want that you can trust it, that is still a technical challenge just because the sheer amount of volume. Because these things are pre-trained, LLMs are pre-trained. So when it's talking to real-time data, it is not a simple thing.
Just inherently LLMs being these pre-trained models, you can't just update like one piece of the model, right? Take this fact out and replace it with this new fact. And so because of that, anything to do with recency, even like Bing's Edge trying to provide more updates to ChatGPT since 2021, these are really engineering hacks to get around the fact that the LLMs just don't work in a way where they can accept and change based on new information in any kind of timely way. And what you really need to do is retrain the model. And that's the most expensive part. They're not going to do that on the millisecond level, even if it was possible to do it that quickly, right?
Yeah.
So real-time use cases, anything that requires low latency between the information and the decision, that's just a big challenge for a long time.
Because true algorithmic trading, they're making those executions directly at the millisecond level based on like that is still vintage AI.
Vintage AI,
Still the
vintage
best.
automation still has its place in this brave new world.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into a demo this week, specifically looking at how good are these tools at some numerical analysis. So skipping away from the NLP tasks, but can you do this numerical analysis using code interpreter? So let's dive in. Let's take a look at doing some financial analysis within the tools within ChatGPT. So if you're paying the $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus, under the GPT-4 banner, they've just renamed this from code interpreter to advanced data analysis. If you don't see it there, it may be that you haven't got it enabled and you need to go under your name and you need to go to settings and beta and make sure that under beta features, it is turned on. So once you have them enabled and you've selected, we want to do advanced data analysis, you can now do some pretty cool things just with some basic file uploads. So in my case, I have gone to a Kaggle, which is a data science competition site, and downloaded some financial data. So this is just a simple comma separated value CSV file of Amazon stock price every day, open, high, low, close, adjusted close, volume of stock trades from 1997 through to April 2020. I'm going to upload that file and just say graph stocks opening, closing, and average prices based on the following input. And then click this plus to upload a file. AMZ. Amazon. No need to adjust the file format. It will automatically recognize that. So it's going to tell you what it's doing as it's going. Let's start by loading the data from the CSV file to examine its structure. So it'll actually show the work that it's doing in Python. So this is the code that it's created. It's read it in, it's reading it out, and it's telling you what it contains. Then open price, highest price, lowest price, closing price. Next, I'll compute the average. What I love about this is because it's showing you the actual code, if you run into issues where you're actually seeing problems with the data not being correct, you can get someone's help in debugging what's going on in the Python code. Or if you know a little bit of Python, you can do it yourself. So see how this actually used a Python graph plotting package and actually provided an export of the data. This is an export of the data from our CSV file. So here's what it looks like over time. And we can even use this to do something a little more sophisticated than just graphing the prices. If we ask it to calculate and plot the 50-day and 200-day simple moving averages of the stock's closing prices, the 50-day gives us a short-term trend, the 200-day is a long-term trend. And as we'll see, anytime the 50-day trend crosses the 200-day trend, it's either a bullish or a bearish signal about the stock. So the rolling window of 50 or 200 days, and it did the plots here on this graph. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. It's actually showing you every time in green, the golden cross, right? A 50-day SMA crosses above the 200-day versus any time that the death cross crosses going down below the 200-day trend. It's interesting here to look at those indicators on the graph right here. Again, I didn't have to write any of this code, right? I just had to write these 2 lines of directions. And with a little bit of knowledge of analysis techniques, it knows what I'm trying to do here, right? So it's actually showing me this graph, but it's also telling me green upward pointing triangles indicate that a bullish signal. Interestingly, too, they're actually telling me, like, do you want to analyze the volume trends? Do you want to predict future stock prices? So it looks like they're definitely adapting these tools for financial analysis. There's also a few plugins. One of them is called Notable that is also used for writing Python. So this is the kind of analysis we're seeing financial stakeholders take into their own hands, where they no longer need someone to write code for them. Super interesting.
Okay, so here's the AI fun, the LLM-based application in daily life that I desperately need, that doesn't exist yet, that someone hopefully hears us and make. I need one attached to my fridge and my pantry.
Okay.
That knows what I have in there, what's about to expire. So I don't overshop, I cook the right thing, and I eat the good leftovers. I want to talk to my fridge and be like, I need something for lunch. I need it to be light. What's in there that all I have to do is either pull out and eat or microwave for a minute.
Mine would be like an episode of Chopped every time. It'd be like, you have anchovies and 6 onions and a bag of Cheetos. Go.
Okay. So I have 3 teenagers. I have a ramen cabinet. I have a pantry that's divided into savory and sweet, and they pack deep with cans. I have a fridge that has like leftovers from cooking, leftovers from going out, and it's deep. Like you only ever see the thing in front. We have fresh strawberries and blueberries, but I had to put them in the back because it's too full. That's what I need. Especially if it's on a app and I could be at the grocery store and be like, do I need to buy onions or do I not need to buy onions?
Right. Well, you could do 2 things. One, you could also tell it, like, by the way, I'm doing keto this week, or help me, I only eat this many calories per day. 2, when you could get it to print out grocery lists. It's one of my favorite features of the home speakers like Alexa. I've heard from several people now. I only use it for a shopping list because I can't coordinate with my husband or with my kids. So anyone can just say, add blah, blah, blah to the shopping list. So people can add things to the shopping list still, but it can basically do the meal planning for you, but also keep tabs of what you have and what you need. That seems doable.
So I have the expansion pack. If you can figure out the food, just add it to the closet. I just did back to school shopping, and the kids have a dress code they have to adhere to. They have to have shirts with collars and buttons, pants that are not stretchy fabric.
Whoa.
And they keep growing. They're really tall. I'm like, what do they really have that still fits that they can wear? What do I need to buy? It is a nightmare. Then I have 2 who cares about what they look like. The one that doesn't care, it's easier. I have 2 that cares about whether they look cool or coordinated or colorful. My daughter wants a different color per day so she can cover the rainbow.
It has to be something you could personalize, and you can either choose to personalize it in the moment. I love these systems that basically tell you what to do, and when you don't feel like thinking, you can follow it. But if you do feel creative and you have the energy for that, you can spice it up yourself.
I need the simple of like, does Kevin have enough socks? Do I need to? Because he cannot tell me, ChatGPT, tell me if I need to buy Kevin 3 pairs of socks.
I feel like that vision of our smart appliances knowing what's inside them and our closets knowing what's inside them, that's been around since I was a kid. And I don't know if it's just harder to implement. Maybe that's where Amazon Go is going with recognizing barcodes and that kind of thing. It's a complex problem, but hopefully these new computer vision models are going to crack it for us. Finally. A lot of this LLM stuff making its way into those kind of home automation, smart home companies. I think there's some cool stuff coming.
Yeah. LLM plus IoT. Please, please, please. My night.
Get on it. Awesome. Well, I think that's this episode of AI After Hours. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope we've provided some insight into the latest goings on. What should we cover next? Drop us a note in the comments. Okay, energy up. Woo!
Where are your shots? We're supposed to be like having our shots right now.
Let's be after hours. I do need some water.
Yeah.
Chug, chug, chug.
This is why I drink sparkly water because the bubbles get you going.